6 games to 3, then 1 game to 6, then 6 games to 0. If you write that scoreline down and hand it to somebody who didn't watch the match, they'd assume you made a mistake copying it. I didn't. That's exactly how the Cincinnati Open final went between Arthur Fils and Frances Tiafoe. And I want to start with the part of that scoreline nobody's really explaining properly. Everyone's calling the second set a collapse, a wobble, a mental hiccup from a guy who'd never won a Masters 1000 before and suddenly felt the weight of it. That's the tidy version. It's also, I think, mostly wrong. Here's what actually happened. As far as I can piece it together from how Phil's talked about it afterward, he came out of the first set playing about as clean as you can play a final, 6 games to 3, dictating rallies, controlling the tempo against a guy in TFO who thrives on chaos and broken rhythm. Then the middle set turns into a landslide the other way, 6-1, not 6-4. Not a tight version where Phil's is fighting off match adjacent pressure. A one sided set in the opposite direction in under half an hour. And then, 6-love, 0 games. In a Masters 1000 final on the biggest stage of his career, Phil's doesn't just recover, he obliterates the guy across the net. That's not a nervous player finding his feet again. That's not a script you get from fatigue or stage fright. Something more specific happened in that second set, something closer to an energy management decision than a form collapse. And I think Phil's basically told us what it was without anyone catching it. I needed to make a little energy at the start of the second set, he said afterward. Of course, no one was supporting me, and so I had to say, let's go. Read that again. He's not describing losing control. He's describing a deliberate reset, burning something in himself to force a reaction, because the crowd wasn't doing it for him. In American finals against American opponents, that's not unusual, by the way. Hostile road atmospheres are part of the sport, and I'm not going to pretend that's some rare injustice. What's unusual is a player essentially telling you, in real time, that the ugly set was the price of the reset switch, not the disease. The medicine, therefore, the 6-love third set isn't really a surprise once you frame it that way. It's the continuation of a plan that looked like collapse from the outside and looked like ignition from the inside. Now let's talk about why that matters more than the trophy itself. Phil's is 22. This is his first ATP Masters 1000 title. He beat TFO in a final that started with him dominating, dipped into something that looked like it might unravel his whole tournament, and ended with him winning the last 12 points of the match in a near perfect final set. Wow, that feels good, he said, twice, back to back, like he needed to say it a second time to actually believe it landed. It's a lot of training, a lot of things, a lot of sacrifice. Injury. To be able to win one title like this means a lot to me. That word, injury, is doing more work than it looks like at first glance. Earlier this year, Phil's dealt with a stress fracture in his back that disrupted the first half of his 2026 season. Stress fractures in the lower back are a nasty category of tennis injury, specifically because they're load management problems, not one off accidents. They come from the repeated stress of the serve motion and rotational power generation. The exact mechanical actions a player like Phil's, who leans on a big first strike, can't just avoid using. You don't just heal from that and go back to full output. You rebuild trust in your own body's ability to load and rotate at full speed without pain flaring back up. So when he says sometimes you have to see the positives from negative things, I don't think that's a generic post match platitude. I think that's a guy who spent months not knowing whether his body would let him compete at this level again, standing in Cincinnati with a Masters 1000 trophy, connecting those two facts out loud. But here's the part of this story that's getting buried under the curious final headline, and it's honestly the more interesting one to me. TFO just had a really good tournament, and the framing around him is almost entirely about the loss. Go back and look at where TFO was ranked coming into this event. He's been dealing with a stretch of stagnation, a couple of years where the trajectory flattened out after the excitement of his 2022 US Open run. This Cincinnati final run pushes him up 11 spots in the ATP rankings to number 12. 11 spots off the back of a runner up finish at one of the biggest events outside the majors. That's not decline. That's a guy climbing back toward the players he's supposed to be compared against. And yet, the post match image everyone's going to remember is him slumped in his chair, looking exasperated after getting bejelled in the third set of a final he led at one point. That's the cruelty of tennis scoring. It doesn't care that you played two mostly excellent sets in a Masters 1000 final. It remembers the last one. I keep coming back to how differently these two players are going to read the same tournament in 6 months. Phils gets the trophy, the ranking jump to number 11, and a genuine case as a real threat heading into the US Open. This is a player who now has top 10 in his sights if the form holds through New York. Tiafoe gets a rankings climb that quietly repositions him as a top 12 player again, minus the celebratory footage, because finals losses don't generate highlight reels the way finals wins do. Here's the hidden variable, though, and it's the part of this that reframes the whole match once you actually sit with it. The prize money split tells you something the rankings don't. Phils walks away with $1,151,380. Tiafoe collects $612,340. That's not just a payout gap, that's roughly double. And it's a reminder that a Masters 1000 final isn't a coin flip outcome dressed up as drama. The financial reward system in tennis is built almost entirely around who's left standing at the very end, regardless of how competitive the path there actually was. Tiafoe played a final that swung wildly, that he genuinely controlled for a full set, and the sports reward structure still treats that as roughly half the value of the win. I'm not saying that's unfair. Exactly. It's just the reality of how these tournaments are structured, and it's worth sitting with for a second before we move on to celebrating the winner, because it explains why one player left that chair looking like he'd achieved something, and the other left looking like he'd lost something, even though both of their rankings went up. Now, back to Phil's, because I don't want to undersell what he actually pulled off mechanically in that third set. Winning 6 games to 0 against a player of Tiafoe's caliber, immediately after your opponent has just won 5 straight games of their own, requires something specific. You have to take away the thing that was working for him. Tiafoe's game lives on rhythm. Big, flowing ground strokes, aggressive court positioning, the sense that he's playing with total freedom. When a player like that gets rolling, the way to stop it isn't to outhit him. It's to change the tempo entirely, shorten points, take time away before he can settle into his swing. A 6-love set against a player with that kind of firepower doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone found the off switch and hit it fast before the rhythm could reset itself. That's the technical read behind. I had to say, let's go. It wasn't just emotional, it was tactical urgency translated into shot selection. Get in, get out, don't let him breathe. Phils has now put himself in the conversation, heading into the US Open as a legitimate contender for his first Grand Slam title, and the ranking math backs that up. Sitting at number 11 with real momentum and a physical green light after months of injury uncertainty, a strong New York run puts him inside the top 10 for the first time in his career. That's not hype. That's just where the points land if the level holds. For TFO, the version of the story worth watching isn't the runner up finish. It's whether this Cincinnati run is a genuine turning point in the stagnation or a one off peak. 2 years of flat trajectory don't reverse in a single tournament, even a strong one. The tell will be whether he can back this up with another deep result before the US Open field is set, because rankings built on a single big week can evaporate just as fast as they arrive if there's nothing behind them. So here's my actual read heading into New York, and I'll frame it as specifically as I can. Watch Phil's energy distribution across sets in his opening matches. Whether that Cincinnati final pattern of one rough patch followed by a hard reset shows up again. Because if it does, it tells you his physical conditioning post injury still has some inconsistency built into it, even with the results holding up. And watch Typho's results in the lead up events, because the ranking jump to number 12 only means something if he can defend it, rather than let it be remembered as a one tournament spike against a soft draw. Neither of those things shows up in a highlight reel. Both of them will tell you more about the US Open than either player's seeding does.